The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Preparing for the Workers' Comp Premium Audit. I'm John Britton, member of the IIAB Cal Emerging Leaders Committee. With us today is Brian Gray of the California Workers' Compensation Insurance Rating Bureau. WCIRB has partnered with the IIAB Cal Emerging Leaders to offer free webinars to help agents and brokers increase their understanding of workers' comp insurance in California. Brian has more than 20 years experience in the classification and test audit process. For today's webinar, we have muted our phones to eliminate background noises. You can still ask questions throughout the webinar in writing through the toolbar of the GoToMeetings. All your questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Brian, take it away.
Good morning. This learning module will provide information to help an employer understand and prepare for the workers' compensation audit. We developed this module with employers in mind, but certainly agents and brokers will benefit from this information as this is something they would discuss with their client. My name is Brian Gray, and I'm a Quality Assurance Director in the Classification and Test Audit Department at the WCIRB. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a basic overview of the workers' compensation premium audit process. We'll discuss why the workers' compensation audit is required and the types of audit that can be performed. We'll discuss the role of the premium auditor and the various records that they may need to review to produce an accurate audit. We'll provide information regarding the WCIRB's California Test Audit program, information about the complaint and appeal process if there's an audit dispute between an employer and the insurer, and we'll conclude with some frequently asked questions. There are two types of audit, basically, physical and voluntary audits. An audit can be conducted in person, by phone, or through correspondence. An audit that is based on an actual review of the employer's records is a physical audit. Even if it's done remotely, if the records have been provided to the auditor, that's counted as a physical audit. An audit that is based only on signed payroll statements obtained from the employer is a voluntary audit. Voluntary audits are only permitted for certain policies that develop less than $10,000 in final premium. The audit is a provision of the policy contract itself. When an employer obtains a workers' compensation policy, they are entering into a contract with the insurer. This contractual agreement allows for the insurance company, its representatives, or a rating authority such as the WCIRB to examine and review the employer's company records. If an employer refuses to permit an audit or a WCIRB test audit, they are violating the terms of the policy contract. All policies that provide California workers' compensation insurance coverage are required to include this provision that's shown on your screen. An examination and audit of all records relating to this policy will be performed within 3 years after the policy period ends. Information developed by audit will be used to determine final premium. Insurance rate service organizations have the same rights we have under this provision. Why is an audit required? A policy is normally effective for 1 year, and the premium is initially estimated based on the annual payroll that's anticipated at the beginning of the policy term. For workers' compensation policies, payroll is used as a proxy for the insurer's exposure. Premium rates are charged per $100 of payroll. The employer's premium deposit payment and periodic interim payments are largely based on the annual estimated payroll shown on the policy application. A premium audit is the process that determines how much payroll was actually associated with the policy at the end of the policy term and is used to calculate the final premium amount. If the initial payroll amount was estimated inaccurately or if the employees were incorrectly classified during the policy period, the audit could result in premium adjustments, either as a refund or as additional premium due. There are penalties for refusing to cooperate with an audit. The insurer is required to audit each policy in order to verify the correct insurance premium. Interim audits may be conducted while the policy is in force. Normally, the final audit is conducted within 30 to 60 days after the policy term ends. The auditor may be an employee of the insurance company or may be a separately contracted audit service. Per Insurance Code, Section 11760.1, if an employer fails to provide access to enable the insurer to complete the final audit after 3 requests by the insurer during at least a 90-day period, the employer is liable for 3 times the current estimated premium, plus cost incurred by the insurer in its attempt to perform the audit. The insurer will need to demonstrate that it made reasonable attempts to notify the employer of the required audit to apply this penalty provision. There are additional reasons why an audit is required. Insurers are required to submit all payroll and claims data for each policy to the WCIRB, as the WCIRB is the Insurance Commissioner's designated statistical agent. The payroll data must be physically audited data if the policy has a final premium of $10,000 or more, or if the policy covers a C-39 licensed roofing contractor regardless of the amount of the final premium. There are additional penalties if an employer refuses to cooperate with an audit. For experience-rated employers, meaning those that have an experience modification factor, they may potentially face an additional penalty if they fail to cooperate with the final audit. The calculation of experience modifications is governed by the California Experience Reporting Plan 1995. It contains a provision at Rule 3 directing that unaudited payroll data for policies that otherwise would require a physical audit cannot be used to calculate an experience modification. If an insurer cannot complete the required audit due to the employer not cooperating, the insurer will advise the WCIRB, and the WCIRB is then required to calculate the experience modification using only the claims values but none of the payroll for the unaudited policy. In many cases, this will cause the experience modification to increase. Prior to issuing the experience modification under this provision, the WCIRB sends a letter to the employer explaining these potential consequences and requesting that they cooperate with the audit. Shortly after the policy expires, the actual exposure during the policy period will be determined by an audit. The auditor may be an employee of the insurer or may be an independent auditor. The auditor will audit the employer's payroll records to determine the chargeable payroll exposure during the audit period. There are numerous adjustments to the payroll amount that may be made based on applicable provisions of the USRP. The auditor will also ensure that the classifications assigned to the business are correct and that individual employees and departments are correctly classified. This may require observing or inspecting the actual locations where employees work. The auditor will also verify that any claims for the policy have been correctly classified. The audit is used not only to produce an accurate premium invoice for the policy, but also to produce accurate payroll and claims data that will be reported to the WCIRB and will be used to calculate experience modifications if the employer is experience rated. The main objective of the audit is to accurately determine the payroll for the subject audit period, because payroll is used as a proxy for the insurer's exposure. Payroll includes gross wages, salaries, commissions, bonuses, vacation, holiday and sick pay, overtime payments, the market value of gifts, and all substitutes for money earned during the policy period by all employees. Some industries, such as property management, are required to include the value of lodging to employees as payroll. There are numerous provisions of the USRP that define what compensation amounts must be included as payroll for workers' compensation audit purposes. This payroll amount is not necessarily the same as taxable wages. For this reason, the auditor may need to require records beyond the basic payroll journal. Beyond records that summarize payroll information, such as the payroll journal or workers' compensation summary, the auditor should spot check summaries against original source documents, such as time cards, to validate accuracy. The auditor may need to review job descriptions or other documents to verify the job duties performed by individual employees, especially when groups of employees have been categorized for classification purposes. Additional records, such as cash disbursements and check registers, and W-2 and 1099 tax records, may be reviewed to ensure that all compensation amounts that must be included as payroll for workers' compensation audit purposes have been identified. Federal and state quarterly payroll tax returns are commonly used to verify the payroll amounts are accurate. Adjustments are made for various payments such as tips, severance pay, bonuses, lodging, or other forms of compensation based on USRP payroll provisions to reconcile or balance the workers' compensation payroll to the taxable payroll amounts. For some industries, additional records may be required to complete the audit based on applicable USRP provisions. Examples include job samples for the construction industry and invoices and gross receipts for some store or dealership scenarios. The WCIRB conducts test audits to verify that insurers are conducting audits in compliance with the USRP provisions. This promotes accuracy and consistency within the workers' compensation industry and helps ensure that data reported to the WCIRB is valid for statistical purposes. Policies are randomly selected by insurer for test audit verification. The test audit program is conducted by or is required by the California Insurance Code. Test audits are used to verify the accuracy of payroll reported by classification, as well as the accuracy of the classifications assigned to individual claims. When performing a test audit, the WCIRB representative will also conduct a classification inspection of the business. Because the audit process will, at times, lead to significant premium adjustments, questions, and in some cases disagreements can result. As a first source of information, employers should contact their insurance representative, agent, or broker. This is the person most familiar with the employer's business operations and insurance policy, and they can often resolve disputes without unnecessary escalation. However, if there is a dispute with the insurer, each insurer is required to have an appeals process in place. The appeals process is explained in a mandatory policy endorsement, which provides important contact information and deadlines. We often hear questions from employers about the audit process, such as this: I have a small business with the premium less than $10,000, but the insurer wants to perform a physical audit. Can they do this? The answer is yes. While some policies under $10,000 are eligible for a voluntary audit, not all are eligible. And the USRP directs that each policy producing a final premium of less than $10,000 shall be physically audited at sufficient intervals to ensure determination of proper payrolls. So the bottom line is, although the insurer can choose to do a voluntary in some circumstances, they could also choose to perform a physical audit. I have a store selling a variety of household merchandise, and the auditor is asking for information about my sales percentages in categories such as floor coverings and furniture. I thought this was just a payroll audit. Why are they asking these questions? Well, the answer is that this information is necessary to ensure that the business is correctly classified. The USRP contains a number of store classifications and has a provision that if a store sells more than one type of merchandise, each of which may be subject to a different store classification, the store class shall be determined based on the highest rated category of merchandise sold, provided that category of merchandise exceeds 25% of gross receipts. So this additional information beyond payroll information may be necessary to process the audit. Question: an auditor called me to set an appointment, so I gave him the name and number for a bookkeeping firm that we use. Now he wants an appointment to come to our actual business location. Do we have to allow this? The answer is yes, this is part of the premium audit process. A site inspection or visit is often necessary to validate the classifications that have been assigned to the overall business, and in some cases to specific departments or employees. We don't like the insurance company that we used last year, so we changed to a new insurer. Now last year's company wants us to do an audit. Do we have to go along with this? Can't they just bill us based on what we reported? As we discussed earlier, the policy contains contract provisions that allow the insurer to complete an audit within 3 years of the end of the policy. If an employer does not permit the audit, the insurance code states that the employer is liable to pay the insurer 3 times the insurer's estimate of the annual premium plus expenses. If the employer has an experience modification, it will be calculated using all of the losses, but none of the payroll for this policy, potentially increasing the applicable experience modification. Gave the auditor a workers' comp summary that has our entire payroll sorted by department and classified, but now she wants to ask me questions about the job duties of individual employees. Can't she just use the report that I gave her? The answer here is that the auditor needs to validate that the information on the report was prepared accurately and that employees are classified based on applicable USRP provisions. In most cases, auditors can perform spot checks to ensure that the information summarized by the employer can be relied upon to produce an accurate premium audit. So for additional resources and references, we have the California Insurance Code. There's a lot of information available on our website that's shown here, WCIRB.com, including additional learning modules such as the one that we're going over today. The regulations that govern workers' compensation auditing and classification are found in the California Workers' Compensation Uniform Statistical Reporting Plan, 1995. And then finally, the regulations that govern how experience modifications are calculated and applied are found in the California Workers' Compensation Experience Rating Plan, 1995. So to summarize, this learning module has provided an overview of the workers' compensation premium audit process. We covered the definitions of physical and voluntary audits, why an audit is required, the role of the premium auditor, the records required for an audit, the California Test Audit program, audit dispute procedures, as well as references and resources.
Thank you, Brian. I now would like to open the webinar for questions that you may have. If you haven't already done so, please submit your questions in writing in the toolbar section of the GoToMeetings. First question here is, how would you recommend handling a customer that you know is paying some of his employees under the table? Is there any penalties that the agent could incur?
Well, honestly, I don't know about penalties that the agent could incur. I do know that this is a challenge that auditors face. Very often they're going to ask to see the cash disbursements journal or check register to try to identify payments that are being handled off payroll. Certainly this is something that seems to occur with some frequency in the construction industry. And so very often the auditor may ask to see job samples or even other job records to sort of indicate, are they reporting an amount of payroll that appears to be consistent with the amount of work that they're billing. This is something that's an ongoing challenge, but as far as any penalties to the agent or broker, that's honestly not something that I'm familiar with.
Right. Thank you, Brian. Our next question is, if you don't know how to correctly classify a particular business in what workers' comp classification, how would you recommend getting the correct classification? Who would you talk to? How would you handle that?
Okay, we do have some good classification resources available. One that's available on our website is a classification search tool. That allows you to input words or phrases and receive information about the classification from the USRP. This is a tool that we're actually working on quite a lot these days. We're adding more and more keywords and search terms that will increase the likelihood of you finding the correct classification based on the information you've input. Additionally, we're working on enhancing the descriptions and definitions for all of the classifications. This is a multi-year project that we're currently engaged in. And so you're going to find that the classifications themselves are becoming more descriptive and more user-friendly. If you're not able to locate the correct classification using that type of resource, we do have a customer service department here at the WCIRB. And you can call in, and they're all very knowledgeable about classification, and they can provide that type of assistance to you.
Thank you, Brian. We've got another question here. If an employer does not agree with a classification that they have been assigned, how do they challenge this?
The first step would be to contact their insurer. Obviously, we recommend that people work through the agent or broker because, again, the agent or broker is presumably the most knowledgeable about that employer's own specific circumstances. If the insurer is not able to resolve the matter to the employer's satisfaction, the insurer may request a WCIRB classification inspection. This is what we call a special inspection. There is a charge for the inspection. Currently, it's $200 per location inspected. We do recommend that inspections are a good tool when you have a basic need to classify the business. Inspections are really not the right tool if you have a dispute about an individual employee or a question as to whether somebody's a clerical employee or whether they need to be included in the governing class of the business. Those types of disputes can usually be resolved by referring to the applicable USRP provisions. But if you're not sure how to classify a business overall or a particular operation within a business, an inspection may be the way to go.
Okay, we've got another question. I think it relates to something we already touched on. How do you determine an independent contractor is a true independent contractor?
Okay, this is something that the WCIRB used to be involved in, but currently we're not involved in. And for that matter, even the California Department of Insurance will not hear appeals regarding employment status determinations. The reason for this is that the employment status determination is based on information in the labor code, not information in the USRP or in the insurance code. And so, unfortunately, this is an area that we really don't get involved in and can't offer assistance in.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question. If a company has 3 employees but all are immediate family, must the company have a workers' comp policy?
This is a question as to whether coverage is required. We, again, don't have the authority to indicate when coverage is required for an individual. I am aware that there are endorsements that can be used to exclude residing relatives. Whether that endorsement would be applicable in this situation, I'm not sure. Again, the basic question as to whether a policy is required at all would be a question that's beyond our authority here at the WCIRB.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question here. If a policy is selected for test audit, but the insured is not cooperating to do the audit, what happens?
If the employer has not cooperated with the insurance company's audit, as we discussed earlier today, there are some penalty provisions. Ultimately, what's going to happen is that the insurance company is going to send a unit statistical report to the WCIRB for every policy that they write. On the unit stat report, they're going to indicate that the audit was not performed, and that's going to trigger the experience modification penalties that we discussed, where we'll use only the losses but none of the payroll for that policy. If they've cooperated with the insurance company's audit but will not cooperate with the test audit, the WCIRB will write to the insurer and request that they obtain the insured's cooperation.
Thank you, Brian. Next question we have is, who can request a bureau inspection?
The bureau inspection needs to be requested by the insurance carrier. They're the company that is a member of the bureau. They're the company that we would charge the $200 to if we're going to perform a special inspection. Certainly, an employer or an agent or broker may initiate this process, but the request needs to come through the insurance carrier.
All right, thank you. Anyone have any more questions? Okay, I would like to thank again Brian for spending the time with us today, for providing us his insight. If you would like to learn more about workers' comp, we will present one additional webinar on October 2nd on an introduction to experience rating. To register for this webinar or to hear the recorded version of the previous workers' comp webinar, visit www.insurefest.org and click on the workers' comp track link. In addition, Bill Mudge, the President and CEO of WCIRB, will be a keynote speaker at the InsureFest November 6th through 8th. We hope to see all you there. It will be at the Sheraton Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. Bill will be speaking on becoming a customer-centric organization. For more information and to register for the InsureFest 2014, visit www.insurefest.org. That concludes today's webinar. Thank you guys for coming. We look forward to having you at the next one.